everybody, this is Saad for the Sad Truth. Today I'd like to read an article that I wrote for the Huffington Post back in May 2015. The article is titled Regarding the quote small minority of religious extremists. I will provide you with a link to the article at the bottom of this clip. Hopefully, if you'd like to follow up some of the links and references, you can do so by clicking on the actual article. So here we go. Suppose that in some dystopian future, the world is dominated by a religion, caloria, C-O-L-O-R-I-A, whose doctrinal texts call for the repeated and unambiguous subjugation, if not outright slaying, of all blue-eyed people. Well, if you are fortunate enough to be born with green or brown eyes, you are safe. However, if you have the distinct misfortune of having blue eyes, you need to examine the dangers implicit to caloria more closely. How should you go about such an onerous task? One can begin by establishing the percentage of caloria adherents who are actually aware of the blue-eyed doctrine, for they are the ones who pose an imminent danger to blue-eyed people. Of those who are aware of the doctrine, one can then determine the percentages of individuals who abide by the doctrine, and those who find ways to deny its existence, argue it away, or merely ignore it. And in doing so, they violate the religious edict in question. Let us suppose that once all of the relevant pruning is completed, we are left with a minority of 20% of all caloria adherents who are committed to the subjugation, if not killing, of all blue-eyed individuals. Clearly, this is a small minority. After all, 80% of caloria folks are perfectly kind, tolerant, and accepting of the blue-eyed people. Given the latter statistical reality, should blue-eyed people be concerned? Well, it depends in part on one's risk tolerance. Some folks are high sensation seekers, example extreme sports aficionados, while others are deeply risk aversive. As such, the small 20% minority might be construed as terrifying or acceptable depending on your risk profile. Individual differences notwithstanding, it might be worthwhile to contextualize the 20% figure in comparison to other risks. Here are a few culled from the National Safety Council. These are lifetime odds of dying from a particular event. Heart disease, 1 in 7. Motor vehicle crashes, 1 in 112. Assault by firearm, 1 in 356. Air and safe transport incidents, 1 in 8,357. I chose the latter 4 events because they are some of the most common fear-inducing triggers. Viewed via this risk-taking lens, 20% seems quite onerous. There are other interesting points of comparisons that might further help us to contextualize the 20% figure. The morbid Russian roulette game, see my Psychology Today article titled, Would You Play Russian Roulette for $5 million? So the Russian roulette game consists of one live bullet being placed in a revolver's chamber. All others are left empty. An individual partakes in the game by placing the gun to his head and pulling the trigger. In a typical 6-chambered gun, the odds are 1 in 6 that this will be the last act that they will ever commit. Very few people would be willing to engage in an activity that has 16.67% chance of resulting in death. Again, viewed from this perspective, the 20% figure seems quite scary. Perhaps one other historical example might provide us with some due sense of proportionality. The Nazi Party in Germany garnered 6.5, 3, and 2.6% of the electoral vote in May 1924, December 1924, and May 1928, respectively, and I provide the reference to these figures. Those are very small percentages, remember, 6.5, 3%, and 2.6%. Much lower than the 20% of caloria adherents who pose a mortal danger to blue-eyed people. The small minority of Nazi extremists did not offer much solace to the 55 plus million people who subsequently died in World War II. Can you think of a current global religious and geopolitical issue that involves a discussion of a quote small minority of extremists? Think back to the infamous debate on Islam between Sam Harris and Ben Affleck on Real Time with Bill Maher. Affleck stated that it was, quote, gross and racist to tar all Muslims, given that only a small minority of Muslims actively engage in violent jihad. For my analysis of this debate, I point you to one of my former Psychology Today articles and also an appearance that I did on the David Pakman show. You could follow the links by clicking on the actual article. Clearly, it is unequivocally wrong to negatively stereotype all Muslims, since the majority is indeed peaceful and law-abiding. So how do we establish what constitutes a problematic, quote, small minority? Well, there are countless relevant data sources that can be used in tackling this issue, one of which is to use global survey data that have tracked Muslims' attitudes on issues that are antithetical to Western values from the highly reputable Pew Research Center. With that in mind, Ben Shapiro, who gained notoriety for his infamous clash with Piers Morgan on the issue of gun control, has examined the Pew data in the context of the, quote, small minority claim, and I've provided you a link to that clip. Readers can decide for themselves whether his analysis is accurate, and if so, whether the data warrant concern. Just as a added note here, this is not in the article, think about results that show that people coming from certain countries and who belong to a certain religion hold 95% to 99% vile anti-Semitic views. This is not small minority, this is 95 to 99%, meaning nearly every single one despises Jews. Is this something that Jews have a right to be concerned about, or is this a small minority that we should not worry about? Returning to the article, people have an uncanny capacity to succumb to a wide range of cognitive biases when making choices, as per the classic works of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. One class of such biases is associated with the manner in which humans process risk information. For example, because of the availability heuristic, people overestimate the relative likelihood of dying in a plane crash as compared to, say, succumbing to stomach cancer. Plane crash information is more readily available in memory because of its vividness. Hence, it is imperative that when discussing issues such as what constitutes a, quote, small minority of religious extremists and what is the likely impact of such adherence, that we be armed with the proper statistical information along with the ability to process the relevant data in a fair, accurate, and unbiased manner. If you appreciated this clip, please consider sharing it, and if you'd like to continue to support or start supporting my work, I always provide, as in the descriptor section, links to my Patreon account and also to PayPal if you'd like to make a one-time donation. Thanks, everybody. I hope you're having a good week. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.